Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Draw with T. I just want to start this off by saying if you're here to see some artwork and just kind of tune out, skip to about halfway through this video because I'm going to be showing you and talking about mind mapping, which you can see I'm already getting started on here. So in the last episode, I was drawing Kaya, which is a character of mine from Calasmere, and she is a Duhrogh, which is a fantasy race that I've basically made up for my story, but they're kind of like dark dryad tree elves with dark crystals kind of protruding from them, but that's all I really knew of them. That's all I had written down. And when I went to draw her, I realized very quickly that I had forgotten to really explore the race and how that race looked. So I decided to, instead of making a portrait of her like I did with all my other characters, I decided to take some time and take a step backwards and just kind of develop some ideas for the Duhrogh race. So I think I've shown you guys this before, probably a few times. Before I even start drawing, when it comes to a concept like this, something a little bit bigger than just simply a little doodle, I will sit down and I will mind map out ideas. So here you can see I've written Siohg, which is another race similar to the Duhrogh, and here I'm just writing out and branching off things that make sense. It can vary what I write down. Sometimes it's looks. For example, they're tree-like. They have bark, skin, leaves, and not all of these are definitive. Sometimes I'll just ramble off ideas, like maybe they have leaf hair, and that might seem like a good idea until, I start sitting down to do it. But the idea is to get down ideas and just get my creative juices flowing, because sometimes you can come up with something really wacky that no one else has done before. Or at the very least, if you're drawing it and you get stuck, like maybe you keep drawing oak trees and then, you look back and you're like, well, I mentioned palm trees. Has anyone ever done a palm tree dryad? I don't know. If not, I'm sure they have now. But then with mind mapping, I'll also write down other things, like, I don't know if I write it here or on the next page, because I do three of these mind maps, I think, where I write down that they transform as they age. So with this race, the younger they are, the more human they look. And here, as you see, I'm doing these little stick figures. As they get older, they become much more branch-like and almost, bestial in a way. And then their final transition is that they turn into trees. Now, to most other races, this seems to be like death. But for the Siohg and the Duhrogh, they basically spend 1,000 years as wandering little seedlings, as they consider themselves, and they finally reach maturity on the day where they have basically gained so much knowledge that they finally set down their roots amongst their kin, because they live in the forest made up of regular trees, but also then trees that are actually the Duhrogh and the Siohg. And, they set down their roots, and then final transformation is into a tree, and that for them is adulthood. So they're kind of a society run by juveniles, because once they ascend to this sort of treehood, they're on a different level. They're kind of in an interconnected space. And it's kind of loosey-goosey as to what that means, because it's kind of outside the scope of the story. And I'm not really right now interested in solidifying it, because I might change aspects of that later on if I do more, some spin-off stories. But it's kind of, I don't know, I think it's an interesting idea that, it's sort of both death and adulthood, and I think it helps make them feel different from other races, which is important because they look very, very human, and that was actually an aspect of designing them, is that they have to look human, because there is a lineage of them interbreeding with humans, so, I wanted them to be human-like, because we do encounter some mixed breeds in the story, and they all have to look human for reasons. But yeah, I just wanted to set it, kind of highlight this process, this mind mapping, and how intensive it is. And then after this, what I did is I made a Pinterest board and I gathered images and more images and images, and you can go beyond Pinterest. I like Pinterest for early ideation, because I can just keep a whole bunch of inspiration in one little folder, and then when things get more serious, I used to keep like an actual folder on my computer, but of late I haven't quite reconciled how I want to keep things, whether I want to keep it on the cloud or not. But Pinterest is a good place to start. It continuously feeds you new images and ideas, and you can kind of have a single folder of ideas. So I'll often mind map, and then I find inspiration, and then I'll start sitting down and doing doodles, kind of like here. Now, after these doodles, I'll be actually getting into actual sketching, and we can talk a little bit more about kind of the next phase. But I keep bringing this up because I want any possible young or aspiring artists who want to be concept artists or anything just to know that there are phases before you even do the artwork, and they are important. Not all artists do it like this. I tend to be very step by step, and I am also a writer, so I do sometimes feel more comfortable going back to words. Not every artist is like that. Some artists are a little less analytical and organized, and it's just kind of they'll draw and then they gather some inspiration, and then they make a bit of a mind map, and then they draw some more. So. The order, you'll find that out yourself, but I just want to introduce you to this thing, and a lot of people will do it. They'll have some form of something that, tells them what they need to do, just so they don't get off track, and also inspiration that helps fuel their drawing. So here I am now moving on to some artwork. So after I get my inspiration boards together, then I start drawing. And sometimes it's a mix of me just drawing whatever I want, maybe from my own head based on a few ideas. And then other times I will draw studies of other people's artwork. I never at any point claim that these drawings of other people's work are mine, and these things that I show you guys, like these pages of my sketchbook, they're not meant to be sold. They're not meant to be stickers or merch or anything. These are for my understanding, and I think these doodles here on this page are more or less almost all my own. There is a page that I do, but I think that's in the next video, where I do flat out draw some people's stuff because I was getting stuck. And I decided I had to draw a little bit more realistic in other people's styles to kind of understand how drawing certain aspects and stuff felt. I think this guy here is actually based on an alien race or something, because I started getting sci-fi popping up in my Pinterest board. But I thought it was a really cool idea, like instead of fins and aquatic stuff poking out from the back of his head, like what if it was like branches? So that's how I kind of modified it. So basically here, I'm trying to just find a look for the Duhrogh. And they're a race that are a little bit harder for me to come up with a look for. Even now, I'm not entirely happy with where I ended things off, but they're a little bit harder. There's the Siohg, which are basically elf dryad people. So they're kind of like elves. They're also like dryads, and everybody's kind of got a different take on dryads, But let's just go with, like there's dryads like Skyrim and D&D where they're basically made up of bark and they've got branches for hair, and there's the only thing human about them is that they're bipedal and they're roughly of human proportion, but otherwise externally, skin-wise, they're very much like trees. Then you have people that draw them basically like women with green hair and maybe like a wreath of leaves or something, but otherwise very human. So how you conceptualize your dryads is up to you, and is a point of exploration. But that's kind of an easier thing to do because that's just mixing two things that already go quite well together. And I mean, the struggle there is going to be to make them original and not just look like accidentally like some other popular media or something, or just so generic that it doesn't mean anything. With the Duhrogh, the problem is they're dryad elf people, but they're dark, supposed to be dark-skinned, and instead of branches and stuff poking out of them, it's supposed to be dark and crystalline, like dark crystals. But also these crystals have to be branch-like, still tree-like, so I have to draw crystal trees. But if there's one thing I haven't been able to find much reference of, it's crystal trees. I figured this would be a very common concept and trope, and that I'd at least find something, but I don't think I've actually found any art of anybody having drawn like a proper crystal tree. I mean, a tree 100% made out of crystal. I've seen people do craft art of, wire twisted in the shape of trees with little beads being like leaves or flowers, but I actually haven't found anybody having drawn like a crystal tree. I'm not very good at drawing crystals, so that's something I might have to practice on to perfect this. But seeing as I kind of wanted to move back onto my path of making a little portrait for my character Kaya, I didn't want to spend too much time delving into concept art for the Duhrogh and the Siohg. I just wanted a first impressions pages of ideas. I just wanted to explore some things, eliminate some things that weren't working, and put down some ideas that future me can build on. Maybe as time goes on, some ideas will hit me. Maybe I'll find something new. But I just wanted to explore some things. And I think in the next episode, there are some interesting changes that come about. But here, now I'm kind of focusing more on the Duhrogh, as opposed to the other page was kind of a little ambiguous with some of the concepts. But, they're supposed to be a darker people. They're supposed to be mistaken as evil, but also later on in the story, I want people to look at them and not just see an evil race. I want them to be like, well, you looked evil, but now that I know more of the story, you look dark. Maybe like they're known as the mournful race. They have a dark, dour appearance to them, but not necessarily evil. And I think about here, I was discovering that kind of that short spiky hair was actually working, and just kind of this sort of jagged ear shapes was kind of nice. Here I'm trying to draw a small Duhrogh child, because once I realized that spikiness was kind of a good look for them, I realized spikiness in children, I don't know if it would work. So how would a young Duhrogh look? Because again, as I said, the younger they are, the more human they look. And as they get older, they start growing these sort of branches and stuff. And I think I'm not quite happy with how that little child is. I think they're a bit too human, but at the same time, maybe that's kind of the point, that they look human other than for their, say, skin color and, their dark eyes. So part of the lore behind the Duhrogh, so the Siohg are a subrace of basically these dryad elf people. And there have been other types of them around, but these are the two branches we know exist, the Duhrogh and the Siohg. So the Siohg migrated down to what would later be Calasmere long before anything really happened, before the humans did, before anything bad happened. They just sort of migrated, and they became a lot more tree-like. They used to be made out of bright crystal. They were called, they don't really have a name because they're so before anything that happens in the story that it hasn't been important they have a name. But the original crystal elf people I just call the proto-Siohg, or the proto-elves as they used to be called. Now the Duhrogh are the remnants of these proto-crystal elves, and they took part in the war that broke Acanthia, which, was kind of like the big conflict that caused people to migrate and create Calasmere, which is where our story takes place. And in the war, the grand crystal forest of these proto-crystal elf people was sundered, which basically means all of their adults, all of their ancestors, their great family trees were destroyed. And this is a race that doesn't really know true death, and it was so devastating for them and so traumatic that all of the remaining living peoples became the Duhrogh. They became the dark-skinned, dark crystal, mournful race. Their eyes changed color. Their very visage became more twisted. Not evil, but just very, maybe not evil, but a little bit foreboding, kind of like how a beautiful willow tree can kind of turn into this gnarled, leafless, dark thing, and, under the right moonlit lighting, it can look kind of like a scary tree. That's kind of the idea with them. And that doesn't mean that all of them are just gloomy and dour all the time. It's just how they look. The older ones are a bit more dour because they have more recent memories of this event because they're so long-lived. But there are some younger ones that, have moved on. They've always been Duhrogh. They don't care. They don't understand. They do have a culture that does make them kind of more mournful. but in the story, that's something we don't fully explore. They start off seeming like just sort of your average evil minion race, but then we learn more about them as the story goes on. As is the general theme in Calasmere, everything at first appears to be kind of one way, kind of a tropey way, but then it turns out it's actually not. Anyways, guys, that's it for this episode. We're gonna have more concept art of these guys in the next episode, so tune in if you've enjoyed this. It gets a bit more wild with some of the concepts in the later episodes. So yeah, like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.